China, and I use the present tense because this is something that usually happens. So how do companies usually prepare people for doing business here in China? What is the kind of knowledge or what is the kind of information that they get? Usually.
Intercultural training?
Yeah, for example, what is entailed in that intercultural training?
It has been a while since I was going through that. To be honest, I'm not that.
Right. What was the core skill? What is something that stayed with you that you remember?
What I remember, I think what I learned together with the book I was reading at that time, what I learned was quickly disappearing when I was arriving in China. But what I learned during my first couple of days or couple of weeks or couple of months in China was a lot of things was coming back by seeing how things are working in China.
Okay.
And
so was it economics or law or just the culture in general?
I would say the culture in general. Things are, you know, what I learned in the very beginning is there's a lot of tolerance but no patience.
Okay, good. It's a good one. So that I would call values. All right, so there are a couple of different things. One of them is the specificity of fairly technical issues. The taxation, the legal system, the economic system, the governance, if you need it for business. So these are fairly measurable and we need them. And then on the other end, at the other extreme, just, when was it? About a month ago, an international fashion company, you definitely know, they called us and they said, can you give a quick introduction into Chinese culture to somebody who is coming to China? And I said, what do you mean, quick introduction to Chinese culture? They say, you know, just the basics they need, like Confucianism, Taoism. And I said, are you aware that these people can get a PhD in Confucianism and Taoism and it's going to help them in no way to make decisions in business in China? And what you said, the values are somewhere in the middle. So the first slide that I will soon show you is how we connect these kind of things together. But before that, I would just like to clarify one quick thing, is what it means to be intercultural. Because very often, and I think these things usually have a pointer. So usually we start with the wrong question. We ask something like, how do I do business with Chinese people? Or how do I do business in China? Which is two questions to start with. But a lot of people imagine something like, the pointer is not going to work on the plasma. So they imagine something like this. There is the Germans and then there are the Chinese. And if I prepare myself for this kind of situation, then I'm prepared to do business in China. Whereas you already know that's not the case. For many, many reasons. First of all, to learn a culture is a little bit difficult to start with, especially something like Chinese culture. But on the other hand, most of the time the business environment is like this. So you are German, you arrive in China, and then the moment you leave the comfort zone of your national or regional or local culture, you start interacting with a lot of cultures. So you can come to the Chinese branch of a German company, and then you are surrounded by colleagues, suppliers, clients, all of those kind of people who can be Japanese, Korean, Canadian, American, and people who are not really sure, to be frank. I think there are people in this room of that sort as well. Not to mention, and we are going to talk about this, that to identify a national flag with a culture is a bit of a simplification. I come from Hungary, so we have a country of the size of a Chinese handkerchief, more or less. But even we claim that there are big cultural differences within the country. Like Northern Hungarians are in no way similar to Southern Hungarians, not to mention others. So I would like to differentiate something, the cross-cultural situation from the intercultural situation. Cross-cultural situation is when you come from one specific culture and you want to know how to do business with another specific culture. And let's say 50 years ago or earlier, that was usually the situation. So that was the situation when people went to a foreign culture, short or long term, but usually they hung out with the locals. They did business with them. They had absolutely no interest or intention to mingle with the local culture. It was more an isolated kind of assignment. And then they went back home again. Very little cultural impact. We live in a different kind of world, even in the sense, not only because we are much more multicultural in multinational companies and even in local companies, but also because if you don't go to China, then China comes to you. So even, just think about it right now. Anybody with a broadband internet access is a global decision maker and a global problem solver. So back home in your headquarters, people don't have to travel to have to work with multinational teams. So this is the difference between cross-cultural and intercultural. Feel free to bring back any of these issues when we discuss later on. And please remember, if you have comments or questions, just fire away. It's perfectly fine. So far, so good? All right. Now, I would like to bring you two tools that we use in intercultural consulting. And one of them is the so-called World Values Survey. And this is too small, but I can send you the PDF of all of my slides. But basically, what it has been, since the early 90s, they asked people questions all over the world, millions of people. Questions such as, for example, do you think that parents have to earn their children's respect? Or do you think children must respect their parents? Questions like, given everything other equal skills, equal experience, do you think companies should make a differentiation on who they give a job to based on gender? Questions like, do you think if the government is doing a bad job, the army should take over the country? Questions like, would you mind if your neighbors were homosexuals? And they asked millions and millions of people very specific questions, and they create this map. So these big blobs are kind of cultural groups of countries, starting with African Islamic countries, Latin American countries, Orthodox meaning the religion, Europe, West and South Asia, Catholic Europe, Confucian cultures, Protestant and English-speaking cultures. And the way they organized these cultures is along, first of all, traditional versus secular. Secular meaning non-religious, non-ideological. And the other is survival mentality versus self-expression mentality. And we can define these in more detail if you have questions later on. But now I'm just kind of going to rely on the basic meaning of the words. Is that okay? Because I think they are not so difficult to understand. Why do we use this? Actually, my previous profession was I was a diplomat, and you use this map in politics an awful lot. And here is why. I don't know, does any of your companies have something like an inclusion and diversity program? Inclusion and diversity. But you know the meaning of these kind of programs. So they usually start from somewhere here, saying that all cultures are equal, and they all deserve respect, and none of them is better than the other. And this is true in general. However, the moment you have a specific goal to achieve, this will change. Because some cultures make it easier to achieve those goals than other cultures. And since we are talking about leadership, and specifically corporate leadership, let's look at taking risks, enterprise, and make money. So if we look at these goals, then suddenly cultures are not equal with each other. So there has been a lot of study over these now 40 years, that there are two very interesting things. First of all, the world is kind of progressing this way. So the makers of the World Values Survey say that 200 years ago, most countries of the world would fit into this corner. And today is different. And the other thing is that the more you go this way, the better it is for business. Which is a quite interesting concept. Look at a couple of things and you can understand why that is. One of the things that they did a lot of research about is legal systems. And you will find that legal systems, such as Sharia law, for example, they usually fit into this corner. Then you go up and you have all kinds of applications of the Roman law system. And then you go up and then you reach the common law system of English-speaking countries, and all kinds of adaptations. So obviously, if you look at Roman law, but you look at something like Pakistan, or you look at common law and you look at Singapore, there are a lot of variations, but basically, this is the way it works. Why is this extremely important? Because if you look at these different legal systems and different social values, some of them make it much easier to do international business than others. And if you have, I don't know, have you ever seen the so-called Ease of Doing Business Index, which is published by the World Bank every year? So they basically rank all the countries in the world in terms of how easy it is to do business. And very often they are accused of being racist, basically. Because at the top of the chart there are a lot of Scandinavian countries, United Kingdom and so on. South Korea, Japan, Singapore, they very often get into the top 10. But otherwise, it is not a very diverse club of countries. But on the other hand, the researchers behind the World Values Survey, they found out a very interesting thing. They basically said, in a social system, how easy or difficult it is to do business, it can be boiled down to one value in cultures. Can you guess what it is? So cultures are basically value systems that dictate behavior. Right? For example, respect old people, or respect old people only if they are smart and earn your respect. These kind of things. So what do you think is the one specific value that makes a culture easy for business?
Risk-taking?
Risk-taking is one guess. Let me take, let's say, at least 3 guesses. Risk-taking, trust, meaning what?
Honesty.
What would trust mean in this case? Respect the contract. Okay, what does honesty mean in this case?
Honesty, like not cheating on long-term business.
Okay, good. One more, perhaps?
Freedom.
Freedom. All right. So actually, you are on the right track in this. So the one value is, how do you treat strangers? People who are not part of your own, what intercultural researchers call in-group. And that is exactly about contract, because in some cultures you sign a contract with somebody who doesn't come from your own group, it's just a contract. If there is a conflict between loyalty to your own group and the contract, loyalty still wins. Or if you say honesty, the same kind of thing. Do I share information with people who are not one of us? Again, the more you treat strangers like your own group, the easier it is to become. So we are a little bit skewed towards here. What does it mean in terms of China? For example, you look at, I'm going to give you a fairly dramatic, radical example, and I'm going to give you another more like everyday example. There is a pharmaceutical scandal, let's say. There is a pharmaceutical product that hurts people. So what's going to happen to the people who are responsible? Are they going to spend the rest of their time in prison? Or are they going to get like a 2-year suspended sentence and a fine of 2 million euros? So one of them is obviously, if you look at it simply, not from an ethical point of view, simply from the business point of view, it has a completely different influence on, let's say, investment, innovation, enterprise, and so on. Or think about hard work versus smart work, right? What is the meaning of overtime? Is overtime something that you are proud of? It's like you are going to war? Or is it a problem to be solved?
Efficiency.
So if you look at these maps, if you look at individualism as a value, a secular and self-expression value, this is why cultures in this part of the map are basically easier to do business in. And these countries here, they are a little bit more difficult to do business in. Having said that, it doesn't mean let's not do business in these countries, because let's remember that at the heart of enterprise is risk. So the higher walls you jump over, the more the risk you take. The higher the risk, the higher the return. So it's basically just a different kind of investing your money, your labor, your whatever kind of assets. Interesting? Okay, so this is one kind of map that we use for decision making. We look at the legal environment and so on. And one of the things that we look at, for example, specifically in terms of China, is that this is the 2020 map. they publish an update every year. So one of the things that you can look at is which way countries go. Because China is right here. Actually, you can see it out of the group of Confucian countries or Confucian cultures in general towards more traditional and more survival mindset. So if you see South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, Japan, they are a little bit farther ahead in this kind of scale than mainland China itself. If you have questions about this later, then I'm very happy to go back to it. If you have questions right now, we can stop for a moment as well. So far, so good? All right.
Where was China 40 years ago, at the beginning of this survey?
The interesting thing is that China made a big progress this way, and then recently started making like a little drift towards, again, towards this axis. So if you measure it, it was a big up, and then now it's a slowdown. Again, it's not a value judgment. We don't say one of them is worse than the other.